This is my story. My story on the man who is revered as the 20th century's greatest writer. A man often misunderstood who through his personal sensitivity and empathy created some of the best literature ever. This is my story of Papa, Ernest Hemingway. These short stories were written and inspired on the shore of Lake Walloon, where the Hemingway's summer cottage is, and where Grace Hemingway's creative genius was gifted to Ernest and others. Good morning. Whoa, that was Grace. Good morning, my name is Dennis Brogan. I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation, produced by 7gen Marketing and the Sustainable Press. All rights and privileges to this simulcast or broadcast or whatever it is are granted by Dennis Brogan and the Sustainable Press. You're free to share these stories. I'd like to thank Rob and the folks here at the social club, the Octane Social Club. It's truly one of the great little vibe, artistic places in central New York. And if you're a writer, come here and get some coffee or mocha cappuccino and sit down with a pencil and a pad of paper and bleed here, because it's a good place to do it. I'd like to thank Lord and Lady Bowles, Paul Kosak. He was here yesterday. He wrote a great book with some other artists called 33 1/3, which is a bunch of poems. Not a bunch of poems, amazing bunch of poems. Kristen Hemingway Janes, Grace Hemingway for the creative genius. This is Kristen's book. I'll show you the cover in a minute, but all the biographers and everybody who's ever helped me do something in the theater world, my daughter Colleen and Megan, Bill and Shirley and Ernest. So I went to a Hemingway writing symposium 2 weeks ago this weekend. I met Kristen Hemingway Janes, and we had to write a short story, and I'd written mine Friday morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, like Hemingway. I've studied him about 30 years, how he wrote, why he wrote. He'd write a word on a yellow pad, a space, a yellow pad. He only used a typewriter to send letters to his friends or to Max Perkins to bitch about his editing. I was up there and I wrote a poem, I wrote a short story about a fisherman on the ice. And it was influenced by, I think, the ice of Walloon Lake. But before I did that, Hemingway was in a bar in Europe somewhere, and I think there were 5 writers. They each put $2 in a pool, and the bet was to write the shortest short story. And Hemingway, being the genius that he was, took a napkin and a pencil or a pen, and he wrote down, "Baby shoes, for sale, never used." He won the $10. I happened to see my good friend, I mentioned Paul, back in 2019, walking along Fayette Street in Syracuse, and Paul's a little older than me, and I texted him and said, "Hey man, good to see you. I saw you walking along, Fayette Street." And when I got to the stop sign, I know you're not supposed to text while you drive, but I texted him, "Here's a 6-word Hemingway short story. Old man walking, heading your way." This is a story entitled "Ice and the Old Man," written on Walloon Lake on March 4th, 1922. That would mean Ernest wrote it on the shores of Walloon Lake. I did in 2022. It had been a great winter out on the ice, thought the old man. The ice was a solid 13 inches thick of frozen lake water below Niles' feet. He had fished these waters for some 84 years, spring, summer, winter, and fall. Niles' grandfather had pulled the ice sled with the little boy sitting tall on the ice when he was just 4 years old. These moments were still fresh in the old man's memory. The wind had come up a little bit since he trudged out on the ice to one of his favorite fishing spots. It was a small cove that had a long rock-type reef which ran out some 100 yards from the point on the west edge of the cove. Niles had filled his bucket with a legal limit of fresh lake perch and one incredible walleye. The sun was beaming down on this late Tuesday morning as Niles sat on his fishing stool. He leaned back and closed his eyes, letting the sun's winter warmth shine down on his face. It was not June's sunny warmth showering him with sunlight, although for early March he could feel spring and summer edging out the cold of winter. It was time to pack it in and head back to the cabin along the lake shore for some lunch and then his afternoon nap. A good nap was always healthy, his mother Jenny had told him when he was 5 years old. Niles chuckled thinking of her stories, her beauty, her grace. He was blessed, he thought. The old fisherman stood up and felt the chain in his upper chest. For the last 6 years, he'd taken medicine for angina that calmed the pain. He was a healthy old guy who could walk the ass off a mule, he joked, during hunting season here in northern Michigan. The angina had started to occur more often lately, giving him more moments of difficulty breathing when they happened. He rubbed his upper chest as if to massage out the pain. Another deep breath, another. It was getting harder to get air in his lungs, and the pain grew as he started sweating. Shit, he thought. Is this the... Down on the ice, Niles tumbled, a slow, slouching motion as he laid down in the soft snow from last night. He was down. The pain was so intense, it felt like an ice pick was poking in his chest. "Oh, God," he whispered. "I hope someone finds me before the ice melts." And then the world went dark. The lake had winter residents, however, only a few would be out on the ice fishing today. Unless someone noticed Niles, he'd either be dead from a heart attack or from hypothermia. His mind was still engaged as he thought about all his friends before him and his wife Debbie, who had passed away 3 years earlier. Would she be there in heaven to meet him? Christ, what do you even get to heaven? What if heaven doesn't exist and you just die? No seeing Debbie, his parents, no pearly gapes, no harps playing, just darkness forever. And that scared him more than anything. He drifted further into what felt like freedom. Is this what it feels like when you die, he thought again. Niles felt the chill of the ice begin to transfer from the snow and ice through his old wool coat. He had a feeling or a thought as his mind raced, and he could see his soul rising above him, hovering. Damn cold was the feeling. It must be cold in heaven and hot in hell, he smiled, his eyes still closed. And then he felt it. The moist wetness across his face and forehead. Once. Now twice. 3 times. It shook Niles awake. His eyes opened to the sun's glow and he felt the warmth again. No more wetness, and then more wetness. Niles rolled to his right and saw Dusty, his trusty black retriever, who in a dog's life was older than Niles, licking his face. Damn dog, he chuckled as Dusty rolled in the snow next to him. The old man was alive. He sat up, then stood brushing the snow off his pants and jacket. Then grabbing the bucket and sledge, he trudged back across the ice, following Dusty back to the cabin for a bowl of soup and a nap. Life on the lake was good, he thought. Life was good, and thank goodness for dogs and their companionship. Old Black Dog, March 7th, 2022. The fire's warmth flowed from the hearth when he smelled it. Damn you, Dusty, your old black dog farts. Niles smiled and laughed as he sipped his cup of double malt scotch. He had bad gas often after eating one of his buddies' venison summer sausage, fresh singed on the barbecue, and a cracker with a piece of extra sharp cheese. But Christ, he thought, Dusty must have eaten a damn skunk for lunch. The old man laughed and thought of his first dog, Butch, a boy and his best friend running the fields above Lake Walloon on a summer's afternoon. Niles reached down with his right hand and rubbed Dusty's belly as he laid on the rug beneath the heart. Spring would be coming soon, after mud season of March and early April. Up in northern Michigan, spring's entry was like a slow pour of cold maple syrup from the can over fresh buttermilk pancakes with the butter oozing out between them. Niles' cell phone rang out. Well, it did not exactly ring. It rang the first 4 bars from God Bless America. For anyone around, it was annoying, but for the former Coastie, it was his favorite tune. He grabbed it and flipped it open. "Hi, this is Niles. How may I help you?" A smile appeared across his face of the wrinkly, old 86-year-old veteran. "Hi, Princess Kiwi. How are you today? Checking in on your old man?" "Yes," his daughter Mallory replied. Niles listened as he sipped a little more warming scotch from his coffee cup. "Aye. Yeah, okay, yeah, okay, Princess. I'll pick him up tomorrow." He finished his cup of scotch and glanced over at the picture of his wife, Debbie, and smiled. They had enjoyed almost 60 years as best friends and lovers. Princess Kiwi was their oldest daughter, Shirley, whose son Chris would be joining his grandfather for a few days or more starting tomorrow. He had 4 grandchildren. Niles, looking down at Dusty while gazing at the fire, said to himself, "If I'd known grandkids were this much fun, Dusty, I'd have had them first," as he laughed hard enough to almost piss himself, which is not hard to do for an old man. The grandfather clock his wife's grandfather had built struck 7 bells. Time to take Dusty out. Dogs, like old men, have to piss a lot, he thought. Niles opened the door. Dusty ran out on the lawn and raised his leg by his favorite tree. The old man just walked over to the edge of his front porch and pissed off into the garden below. Dusty sniffed around the lawn, occasionally looking up at Niles. The moon was rising above the lake east of Lake Walloon. There was a peace floating in off the lake, a coolness on the breeze that blew the whiskers of his beard. The next week or so would be filled with stories and laughs and fishing, he thought. Dusty jumped up on the steps of the porch as Niles sat down. It was too nice an evening to go to bed. Hell, it was only, he checked his pocket watch, 19:15. Hell, that's pretty early. Normally, he was in bed by 8. But tonight he felt young and vibrant, of purpose. That was something Niles always believed in, being of purpose. Having a reason to wake up one morning, good buzz or not, the night before, and celebrate the day by doing whatever it is you do to the highest purpose of those you serve. Even after being in the Coast Guard, Niles did not learn about purpose until he met his wife, Debbie. Niles filled his coffee cup with a little scotch and grabbed a pack of Marlboro Red cigarettes in the cupboard above the coffee maker. He poured 3 fingers of the scotch in the cup, put the Reds in his pocket, and slowly strolled back to the porch and sat on the steps. Dusty was laying to his right as he hunkered down on the wide pine boards. Damn, he thought, life is good on the lake. He heard a loon. He thought he heard a loon out on the lake. The loons no longer nested here. However, once in a while, a pair would make their way north, south, east, or west, and spend a night or two. The cooing sounds between the pair brought a sweet sense of love to the old man. Gaudy, mister. She was his life, his best of his best friends, and Niles had a lot of friends. He could hear the female loon calling out to her lover and partner. Coo, cock-a-coo, coo, coo-coo. Niles looked down at the lake and imagined Debbie trotting up the stone walkway he had built by hand from the slate from across the road on the ledge above the little grove of flowers. They owned the land. It was Debbie's garden. Even at 88, Niles still felt as if he were 20. Tomorrow he'd pick up his grandson at Pelliston Airport for another great adventure. God, he loved life, and man, did he love living it. Time for bed. As he sipped the last of his scotch, Dusty followed into the cabin. Niles brushed his teeth and jumped in bed. He did not need a bed warmer. Dusty had done the job. He crawled in his bed and felt the soft mattress his daughter had delivered 3 weeks ago for his birthday and dreamed of cuddling Debbie. Niles embraced his pillow and slid off to sleep. Holding the pillow tight, he whispered, "Love you, Peaches." He was so at peace. The next one is a partial short story. We had this guy in Lake Walloon on our Friday gathering come in out of the blue and pop down from the other side of the hearth. He wasn't part of our group. He came and said, "Hey, I'm not part of the group, but I'm over here and I'm just listening. Like, this is all cool that you're all here to study Ernest Hemingway and write like him, and like Semper Fi was a Marine." And I got a question. He looked at Kristen Hemingway Janes and he said, "What's it like to be a Hemingway?" And she, in her gracious, polite manner, but really smartly said, "What's it like to be you?" And he got it. It was a pretty cool moment. So the next morning we're meeting in the workshop, and Diana, who was the workshop leader, brought up this guy last night. It was sort of upsetting, sort of made us uncomfortable, and I raised my hand. I said, "Let's call him John." So we called him John, and I said, "I'm going to write a story about John." Well, it turns out John's name was really Seth Ankerson. And he's from the northern, right from the UP. He was a Marine, works in the national parks as a craftsman. And this is Seth's story. It's called Finding Seth. March 6th, 2022. That'd be Sunday morning, 2 weeks ago. I'm in Lake Walloon in the hotel room looking at the lake. It was a crisp, sunny morning as the bugler played taps. Archie Myers Anderson would have been 92 years old today. Seth, Archie's grandson, stood at attention as the Marine Corps guard handed him the flag which had been draped on Archie's casket. Seth, like his grandfather, had been a Marine too, serving his nation. Archie was laid to rest in St. Clement's Cemetery, a Catholic cemetery across the road from the end of the runway at Pelliston Airport. Archie had been a Marine pilot who flew missions after the war. It was fitting the old man would hear the planes and jets take off and land by his grave. Semper Fi, Seth thought as the flag touched his fingertips. One lone tear slid from the edge of his right eye. Damn, he thought. He did not cry much. However, the sorrows of losing his great-grandpop had broken down his 6-foot 8-inch frame. And then an emotion of joy swept through him. Semper Fi, old man. Semper Fi. So Hemingway was a fisherman. He's actually accredited with starting the whole sport fishing trade that guys spend $1 million now to fish for. And this is a story about a fellow by the name of Dennis Murphy, who I created, who was an English literature professor at Hobart College over in Geneva. And it's called Fish Story, March 8th, 2022. It was a fish story about bones. A story about a young boy who had caught the biggest marlin ever. Dennis Murphy was a college professor of American English literature at Hobart College in Geneva, New York. Beyond being a college professor, he was one of the world's biggest Hemingway freaks. Rather, he was crazy discovering new angles and stories related to Ernest Hemingway. In that search from the John F. Kennedy Museum Hemingway archives to elsewhere on the continental United States, he sought the places and spaces Hemingway traveled. In all the stops and all those files and letters, he found one lone, interesting story of a fish. And he was going to go see if it's true. Through the United States State Department Cultural Office, he arranged for a research visa to visit Cuba and Hemingway's home and village. Dennis had a lunch date with Gregorio Fuentes, Hemingway's fishing buddy and first mate. Gregorio was still alive, still smoking his cigars at 101 years old. He waited patiently in the Miami airport terminal for the boarding call. Flight 721 to Havana, Cuba, now boarding at gate A11. 721. That's Hemingway's birthday. Someone was fooling with him, he chuckled. Eagerness crept into his body and his mind began to race. Dennis was going to the Finca and to lunch with Gregorio. It was a feeling that overwhelmed the man so much the flight attendant asked if he was okay as he entered the cabin. He had splurged and bought a round-trip first-class seat for the 40-minute flight. In a little more than an hour, he'd be standing on Hemingway's Island. He'd walk the streets of Havana, the yard at the finca. His mind drifted as the jet lurched down the runway. 2 hours later, he was checking into the same hotel that Hemingway had stayed in, where he had written and slept. He felt chills when the desk attendant handed him the keys. Dennis was staying in the room next to the suite Papa had occupied. It was time for a drink after he called the consulate to confirm the lunch with Gregorio tomorrow. Dennis unpacked his ditty bag. He traveled light. 3 T-shirts, 6 pairs of skivvies, 5 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of cargo-style shorts, and a few golf shirts. He had one special shirt for dinner planned later in the week, he hoped. Dennis opened his travel kit, opened the tap, and out came the brown-tinged water. What the hell, he thought. Dennis reached over to the little nightstand and grabbed a bottle of water. He poured it on a washcloth and wiped the day's travel from his brow, cheeks, and neck. Better get used to sweating, as he thought crossed his mind. He would stroll a little, eat some good, authentic Cuban food. Murphy would find a bar or two Ernest had frequented, and then slam on a good buzz tonight. You only live once, he said to himself, at least once in this lifetime. He grabbed his straw hat, sunglasses, and wallet, leaving his cell phone in the room. Dennis was not expecting any calls in Cuba. He secured his room door and headed for the stairs. Let's see. The first stop would be El Floradito. That seemed to be a good walk to have a drink with Papa and the people Hemingway adored. As he walked down the hotel front steps, he stood frozen in time, glancing at the commotion and the Cuban people doing their daily routines. Is this what Papa witnessed on his first steps? Dennis smelled the fresh air that carried in on the breeze from off the bay before the city. He smelled the exhaust of the old American cars that were cabs in Havana. And then he took a moment to breathe in the intoxicating aroma of the street vendors' varied food being cooked and warmed on the open grills and flames in the square. He had dreamed of knowing what Hemingway had first experienced on those steps in the city of culture, life, and lore. Dennis was standing in the footsteps of his literary idol. He turned to his left and began to stroll. There were hundreds of pigeons and little swallows or some bird. There before him was the dream of feeling Papa's senses, what they must have engaged as he tried to absorb every nuance and emotion. In a few short blocks to the bar, Murphy, that was Dennis's nickname, experienced an emotional transformational energy. It was like a feeling he had never felt before, goosebumps and a keen sense of sensory overload. It was nearly making him breathless. Dennis entered the bar and stopped for a moment to let his hazel eyes adjust to the dark room. It was a little after 1 p.m. He reached in his right rear pocket and took out a fresh, pressed white hanky. His eyes were teary from the change in light and from the emotions. And then he saw the big hulking grin of Hemingway. It wasn't a dream. The El Floradito had a life-size statue of Ernest Hemingway in the exact place that Papa had drank his frozen daiquiris. There was no one standing next to Papa. Murphy slid in the spot next to the statue and told the bartender, "I'll have what he's drinking." The old man in the red jacket behind the big bar started the routine that had made what Hemingway called the best damn daiquiri on the planet. He was absorbing the moment, every nuance in the room, the people, the smells. And then the barkeep slid over the elixir of the man that Murphy idolized. And now the taste, he thought. Damn, that was cold. The freshness of the ice and the alcohol brought forth memories. Memories of his grandmother buying him his favorite ice cream cone at Gannon's in the valley where he grew up. Murphy licked the rim of the glass as a young boy would lick an ice cream cone. He looked to his left and winked at Papa. "I'm going to find out the real story about the fish," he whispered to Papa. "One true and genuine sentence, huh? Dennis said. Gregorio would know the truth, and tomorrow he would see if Gregorio would tell him the same story. In his notes, it said that Fuentes told Papa the story one day as they brought the Pilar back from a day of fishing in the stream. The old man had fished for 84 days without catching a fish. That was the opening sentence of The Old Man and the Sea, but was it true and genuine? Was it an old man who caught the big fish or a young boy? That was the conflict in Murphy's brain. He had read in a letter that the real story was about a young boy, about 12 years old, who had made enough money fishing for the other fishermen that he bought a small sailing skiff. The letter alleged that Gregorio had told Papa a story of a young boy who went out fishing one day and was gone for 4 days. His 75-year-old uncle, who the boy lived with, had stayed for 3 days and 3 nights on the end of the jetty, waiting for the boy, looking out to sea for a glimpse of the top of the boy's mast. The old man had prayed to the gods of the sea and the sky for his nephew's return. He would give his own life to know the boy would return. He had no more fish to catch. He had trained the boy to fish. Carlos was retired, but when he fished, he was the king. Always the biggest and fattest fish to feed his family and friends. According to the story, on the 4th day, the mast did appear, its sail full in a slight beam reach. And when the sailboat slid up on the beach, the boy collapsed his body, draping over the tiller. The old man jumped in the boat and held the boy tight. His friend Juan handed him a jug of water, and he poured the water over the boy, drenching his tattered clothes. He prayed again, and the boy opened his eyes. God was good. God was great, Carlos said. God was good. He tied to the gunnels of the 16-foot boat was the largest fish anyone had ever caught. It was a full 2 feet longer than the boy's boat. Its bill and head glistened in the warm morning sunshine. The big marlin was at least 18 feet long, maybe longer, and there was nothing after the fish head but bones, stripped clean of the meat. The boy smiled at his uncle. I caught him. I caught him, and I felt sad when he was finally at the boat. And then the sharks came, and I defended the great fish, and I lost him to the devils. Murphy hoped the gods of the sea and the gods of the sky were in his favor when he went to meet Gregorio. Like the old man, or the boy, or Hemingway, Murphy was on his own fishing trip. Fish 2, March 9th, 2022. The smoke of the cigar encircles Gregorio's head like a wreath, thought Murphy. Like in C. Clement Moore's famous Christmas poem, "'Twas the night before Christmas." It felt like Christmas for Dennis. Instead of sitting by the fire and tree, he was sitting on a little porch next to the home Gregorio and his wife had lived in for decades. 101 years old. Murphy thought of all the stories this old man must have. The old salt had left the Canary Islands as a young boy of 10 years old, was his father on cargo ships. The old man handed Murphy a big, fat, hand-rolled Cuban cigar. Dennis liked a good cigar, with 3 fingers of his favorite Irish whiskey. He held the fat stogie to his nose and breathed in the aromas of the varied tobacco that's contained inside the long leaf wrapped tight exposed to his nose. He cut off one end with his own personal cigar cutter. Gregorio was impressed. Dennis put the other end in his mouth and dampened the exterior of the cigar's end butt. The fisherman handed over his personal lighter that Papa had given him. Murphy was holding something of Papa's. His hands began to quiver ever so slightly. Get a grip, Dennis thought. He touched the flame to the end of the cigar and drew in. The tobacco ignited and a red glow appeared and the smoke trailing in the wind. Dennis bowed his head to Gregorio in reverence of the moment. He took his first full toke of the Cuban gin and coughed out his brains. Gregorio broke out in laughter that brought a youthful glow to his face. He jumped up and leaned over to pat Murphy on the shoulder. It seemed the cough had mellowed the ice, bringing humor to the nervous moment of meeting someone new. Murphy took out his notes and asked Fuentes several warm-up questions. What was it like to fish with Papa? What was it like to hunt for German submarines during World War II in the Gulf? What was the best day you ever spent fishing with Papa? The old fisherman told his tales, in-depth tales of fun he had with Papa, of sunrises and sunsets they had shared above the Pilar. Dennis felt his heart quicken with his last question. It was the reason for his trip, for the fish story. He leaned forward and looked at the interpreter and asked the question. Was the old man in the sea about a young man or an old boy who caught the biggest fish ever? Gregorio's eyes squinted and he moved in the chair. Dennis sensed the discomfort in the question. He looked at Gregorio. I heard a story. It was really about a boy who had fished with his Uncle Carlos. The tension between Fuentes and Murphy grew, and the old man smiled. Through the interpreter, he said, yes, it was about a boy. Carlos was the boy, and he was Papa's first fishing mate. Dennis wanted to ask one more question. He asked the interpreter if Gregorio would favor him with one more answer to the mystery. So Hemingway is said to say that the story and the character of Santiago were not modeled after you. Is that correct? The old man drew in his cigar that was burning down to a little stump. He looked at Dennis, turning his head, and spit a small piece of the cigar on the ground next to him. Not my story. That's Carlos' story. 3 days later, Murphy's plane was rising above the city of Havana in the Isle of Cuba. He knew the answer now. That day on the porch, he asked one more important question. Gregorio Fuentes delivered the gem of the story. He and Papa had been fishing. Papa had been working on the first sentence to a poem or a short story on the fishtail. He told Gregorio both opening sentences. The young boy had fished for 84 days without catching a fish. The old man had fished for 84 days without catching a fish. Hemingway asked his trusted first mate which one sang to him. Gregorio pondered for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "The old man, Papa." Hemingway at the helm of the Pilar asked, "Why the old man?" "Because the young boy, he will fish again and again. And the old man, he may never fish another day." That made so much sense to Dennis. Youth versus aging, life versus death. The story he had heard was truthful, but not the truth. Murphy smiled with a wide grin. The first sentence in the book was true and genuine. It was Hemingway's story. So this professor teaches English literature at Hobart, and he has a student named Jimmy Conover. And Jimmy had an old uncle. If I could, let me get a little sip here. To my old Uncle Tom. But he had an old Uncle Tom, too. And this is a story about Jimmy, who's a student of Dennis's. Finding Ernest's trunk. Oh, the story is that Hadley, in her early days with Ernest, married in Europe, she was in Paris, and he was in the mountains in Switzerland or northern Italy or someplace. And he said, come see me. And she grabbed his trunk, which probably wasn't much much bigger than this bag. Maybe, let's say it's 3 times the size of this bag. He grabs that trunk, and she took it with her and checked it with the bagman. Somewhere along the way, they lost the trunk, which contained all of Ernest Hemingway's early writings, every story he had ever written. So it was a pretty traumatic thing. So Murphy had told his class this, and one kid's named Jimmy, and he sort of likes Hemingway, and here's his story. Finding Ernest's trunk, March 7th, 2022. The check came in the mail, $55,283.28. Damn, he thought. Now I could be a hobo like Hemingway or Jack Kerouac. As a 19-year-old college sophomore studying English literature at Hobart College, he was ready to find the Holy Grail. Finding Ernest Hemingway's truck with all his writings that Hadley had brought with her when she meant to meet Ernest. Doing the right thing only to have the rail company misplace all of his early masterpieces. That probably portray his genius as it was in that embryo stage. The trunk carried within its wood leather case a brilliance the world would never see. He would find the trunk and the jewels inside. James Conover would make it his mission to find the Holy Grail. J-Mick, as he was called by his buddies, booked a flight to London on Thursday. He was going to find Ernest, just like the book he had read 2 weeks ago about finding Leonard Cohen, written by Paul Kosak. He'd be hunting for a trunk while truly finding his genuine self. What was Hemingway, what was he said? Ah, yes. Write one true and genuine sentence. Let the adventure begin. Jimmy, as he preferred to be called, started packing. Old Uncle Tom always told him, pack light. If you take more than 35 pounds, you're taking too goddamn much. He'd pack light. Old Tom knew his shit. The sailor had made 3 transatlantic crossings along Columbus's route in a sailboat. And just like his uncle, Jimmy would navigate the route Hemingway's trunk took. He grabbed his journal and started writing, detailing everything he had packed. He also noted the first city to start the search in. What was the name of the town? He glanced at the map laying on the dorm bed. There were several red and green X's noted that indicate where the trunk might have been offloaded mistakenly along Hadley's journey on the train. The inheritance from his old Uncle Tom's estate would fund his adventure. Jimmy closed his eyes and remembered his uncle's joyous laugh, telling stories and sailing the Atlantic and the Great Lakes. The old sailor man had good stories and great little sayings. What was it old Tom told him? Finding your way in life is like crossing the ocean. You know where you're going, but you still have to navigate the seas and storms before you get there. That was part of the adventure, not knowing, but having the purpose and fortitude to push through and hold the course, hold the rub line. Jimmy connected the X's one by one on the map along the trail. He was chasing a dream when he was actually on a journey of self-discovery. Jimmy closed his eyes again and thoughts flew through his brain. In looking for Ernest's trunk, you'll be finding yourself. The dorm room opened and his roommate Marcus strolled in carrying pizza, wings, and a 12-pack of beer. So I wrote 17 short stories in 12 days from a prompt I wrote on a yellow pad like this. I had done my story the night before, as I told you, The Ice and the Old Man, and Kristen's friend insisted, you know, Dennis, why aren't you writing? Her name is Hema Alva. She's with the UN Cultural Arts, like one of the top arts people in the world. Why don't you writing, Dennis? I said, no, I'm done. I've finished my homework. First time I've ever done that in my life. And I wrote down, write 12 short stories in 12 days. Can't be hard, anywhere from a 6-word story to 800 to 1,500, 2,000 words. So there's 3 stories within these short stories, but the real one that's come forth is the story of Dennis Murphy, And so this is the Murphy story continuing. Dreams in the Stream, March 11th, 2022. He had the same dream every night since his return. The cold sweat, his heart quickening, and then the feeling of loss when he awoke from the dream. The dream was repetitive always, ending with him searching for himself and something he had lost. But what did he lose? That part of the dream never came to him. Murphy awoke and felt the morning dew on his thin wool blanket. What the hell was going on, Dennis asked himself as he edged over to the starboard side of the aft cabin on the Chris craft. He was anchored in a small cove on the north side of Stony Island. Dutch John Bay was one of Murphy's favorite anchorages on the northeast end of Lake Ontario, the Half Moon Bay where he spent many weekend nights alone or sharing the solitude with his fishing buddy. It was a peaceful place. The island was 1 mile long, about a quarter mile wide, with a little cove that reached deep into the island. There were 2 camps on the island, one big corporate large one owned by a large international company, and one small lone camp alone on the shore of Dutch John Bay. It was mid-June, and while the air was warm, the lake was still held the cold chill of winter. Murphy stripped off his worn cargo shorts. He was a free baller in the summer. He pulled his t-shirt over his head and dove into the clear, chilled lake. This was the routine he had. Every morning, rain or shine, he took a morning dip. Murphy was bare ass swimming, as he called it. As he laid on his back floating, the memory of swimming nude on late summer nights by the country club on Skaneateles Lake filled him with joy. Bare Ass Beach, as the locals had called it for generations. It was a beautiful sandy beach. It was a favorite place to go after a night sweating and dancing to the Dean Brothers, Juke and Bone or Steak Knife at Under the Stone. The summer of his senior year in college, he had met his wife on the beach. Dennis climbed up the ladder and soaped up. Then he dove back in to wash off the bubbles. The sun was rising above the horizon from the northeast. It was another beautiful day. Time for fresh hot coffee in a bowl. He had one of those Keurig makers that his daughter gave him for his birthday. One perfect cup of joe. That's all he needed. The coffee and the cannabis provided all his engine needed to start the day. Murphy grabbed the warm cup in his old soapstone bowl. He opened the little film canister and tapped the bowl full of Papa Chubby's bubble gum. A sip of coffee, savoring the warmth and fresh vanilla flavor, light the bowl owl's head, and suck on the butthole. The first sip and the first pull were the start of his wake and bay routine he developed in college. The sun was in full brilliance as it rose above the distant shoreline. He reached over and grabbed volume 68 of his journal. Those little notebooks were filled with his life's travels, his life's dreams. His souls were on those pages. Some pages were written in pencil and some in ink. Either way, the words, ink or lead, they all had meaning. Hemingway supposedly said, "Writing is easy. You just sit at a typewriter and bleed." Dennis did not use a typewriter to write. His choice of canvas was a yellow pad and a handful of number 2 pencils. "Writing is easy," he wrote in his journal. "You just sit with a yellow pad and a pencil and bleed." Murphy saw the osprey flying overhead on its morning fishing mission. He noted the beautiful manner in which the bird flew on the wind in the journal. Its grace as the bird soared above the lake was enchanting. A moment of freedom, Dennis noted in his journal. Freedom from what? A fish jumped to his right. Murphy glanced at the ripples of the fish breaching the surface. What was it Gregorio had told him about fishing? He scrolled back in his journal. It was the journal notebook he had in Cuba. At the lunch meeting, Hemingway's first mate, he asked the old man about the question, what it was like to catch a big sport fish in the Gulf Stream. How did Papa fish, was the original question. Gregorio had said something about the fisherman. But the fisherman thinks he's catching the fish, but it's really the fish that catches the fisherman. What did the old salt mean by the fish catches you? Murphy grabbed his pole and baited the hook with a fresh minnow from the fishing well. He let out a little line and cast it like a quarterback tossing a football. Right on the spot. He was a good man hunting the woods around Skaneateles, but he was an even better fisherman. Fly fishing or lake fishing with his Shakespeare rod and reel setup, he caught fish. He let the bait settle a few seconds and then gingerly reeled in the line, leading the bait fish slowly, with an easy pace. He looked up at the osprey. Who will catch the fish first today? Who will catch the first fish today, my friend? Dennis chuckled as he grabbed his coffee and swigged down the last bit. Boom! Fish on! Dennis whispered. It was not a small fish, he could tell as the line whizzed off the reel. 1005, 1006, 1007. He pulled the line and set the hook. The fish darted harder and stronger, attempting to get away. Murphy worked his way back along the starboard side of the aft deck. He was working the fish like a cowboy riding a bucking bronco. A fisherman must engage a rhythm and pace to ride for 8 seconds. For a fisherman, those 8 seconds could be 8 minutes. Yippee-ki-yay, Dennis shouted. This bronc was trying to throw him off, to throw the hook from his mouth. Murphy raised the reel and took in line as he brought down the rod. He repeated it and repeated the action of pulling up and reeling down. The fish jumped a full 2 feet out of the water. It was the biggest damn lake trout Murphy had ever viewed breaching like that. It was a fighter. The line whizzed out again. He let it go lightly, tightening the drag on the reel. The feeling of his 6'2" frame, all 245 pounds of him, against the will and determination of this beauty was energetic and consuming his strength. This was a big fish. The battle continued for nearly 20 minutes. Murphy was tiring. The fish was tiring. Both adversaries were losing the battle. Suddenly, the fish gave up, and the fight was over. He had won and was reeling this majestic fish to the boat. Holding the pole in his left hand, he grabbed the big net and the rod holder next to him. 1, 2, 3. Murphy scooped the monster in the net. He dropped the pole and grabbed the net handle by both hands. This was a two-handed monster of a fish. He landed the fish and dumped it in the cool, fresh well on the port aft of the boat. The fish could live in it for days, in the well which had fresh lake water flowing through it constantly. Murphy grabbed his cell phone and snapped a picture of the fish in the live well. He had caught the big boy. And it was way too much fish to eat. A small laker, no problem, but this baby, Murphy wondered if that's what Gregorio had meant. The fish catches the fish, or the fish catches the fisherman. Satisfied with his morning catch, Murphy looked up at the osprey, now sitting in a tree above the lake, some 100 yards away. I caught the biggest fish, he said, laughing. The moment was true and beautiful as he laid the fish, and then he reached in the live well and grabbed the lake trout by the lower jaw. The moment was true and beautiful as he laid the fish back in the water and gave it a shake and let it go to live another day. It was something to think about on his cruise to Kingston, Ontario. Like Hemingway taking the Pilar from Miami to Key West on her maiden voyage to his new home. He would dock in another country and harbor tonight. Murphy started the blowers and let them run. In a few minutes, he'd crank over the two 327 horsepower Chevrolet engines. He took out the ship's log. Murphy noted the time, 07:21. That number seems to be popping up for some reason. He'd play those numbers in the Ontario lottery when he went to the Kingston Brew Pub for his favorite beer on the planet, Dragon's Breath Ale. He pulled the anchor. The My Pilar was off the hook and on the high seas again. Murphy made a note in the ship's log. Find a first mate. The Ice and the Old Man, Black Dog, A Fish Story, Finding Seth, Crossing the Stream, Finding Ernest's Trunk. These stories and more are brought to you by the Sustainable Press and 7Gen Marketing and Branding. Stories written in the style of Ernest Hemingway, authored by Dennis S. Brogan, who reads his own words. A one-man show featuring the author and actor Dennis S. Brogan portraying Ernest Hemingway in Papa, An Evening with Ernest. In the play, Ernest hosts a young female reporter from Petoskey, Michigan, who's seeking the answer to her wonderment of the Nick Adams stories. Would Hemingway share his skills of writing and his rules for writing, his passion for the written word? Hemingway shares his craft on the veranda of the Finca in Cuba. Writing is easy. You just sit down with a yellow pad and pencil and bleed. For more information, or to book the stories from Walloon Lake, or schedule the one-man show Papa, An Evening with Ernest, email DennisSBrogan@gmail.com. Peace, love, sunshine.